The Chernobyl disaster occurred at reactor 4 of the Chernobyl power plant near the city of Pripyat in the north of Ukrainian SSR in the Soviet Union. It is the worst nuclear disaster in history, both in terms of cost and casualties. It's one of only 2 nuclear energy accidents rated as 7, the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Event Scale. The other being the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan. Now for Chernobyl, the cause was linked to design flaws in the reactors and also human error. 300,000 were displaced from their homes and are still forbidden to return. And you can see I've got here taken delivery of this. Now I have had a sneak look inside, it's not my first view, but what you can see what we've got here. This is, look at that box, isn't that nice? This is a bottle of apple spirit from the Chernobyl Spirit Company. Lovely box. Okay, here it is. There we go. Now this I took delivery of just recently. The question's going to be, I'm going to test this in a minute, is this radioactive? I'm going to use some basic equipment to try and work that out in a amateur and perhaps non-scientific manner. Also just to say, I've got no links to this company. They are just a company I've got an interest in their product. Mostly because this Chernobyl Spirit Company is a social enterprise aiming to produce high quality products from land in the areas of Ukraine abandoned after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. I'll also talk about this social element in more detail in due course. This product was made in 2020 and has been shipped across from the Ukraine in recent weeks, I think. So I contacted a chap called Jim Smith from this company who's let me know that he's okay with me making the video. He's also allowed me to use the content and the images from the website. So thanks very much, Jim. I appreciate that. Jim is Professor of Environmental Science at Portsmouth University. Jim has also recommended a great book to me that I've been dipping into, Midnight in Chernobyl by Adam Higginbotham. So thanks very much. The Chernobyl disaster was brought back to my attention recently with the brilliant HBO series. And this event has always fascinated me. From when I first heard of it, probably in the early 90s, when I heard tales of contaminated land in the Lake District as a result of this nuclear meltdown that happened in the USSR years before. This formed part of my early introduction perhaps to geopolitics. When I first heard about this product, I thought I've got to have it. Partly to test it with a Geiger counter, which I'll do shortly, as I say. But I would also say that I have earmarked this as a Christmas present, and so I won't be tasting it, but not necessarily because I'm scared of it. So let's get into it. So more than 30 years after the accident, Jim and his colleagues believe that what the area most needs is 2 things. First of all, economic development, and secondly, management of the unique wildlife resource that has been abandoned in the area. Now, 75% of the profits from this product go from the company, from this Atomik, the Chernobyl Spirit Company that created Atomik, towards supporting communities in the areas affected in the exclusion zone, but also to do with wildlife conservation. So I had to start thinking about how to test the radioactivity of a product and other products to get some sense of how radioactive perhaps this is. So the environment around us is radioactive. This is background radiation. We have to test that, and then I'm going to test some food products, fair trade bananas, Brazil nuts from Bolivia, to compare that to this. So about natural radioactivity then in food. Some of our food contains small amounts of radioactive elements. Food can gain this radioactivity in a number of ways. They can uptake it through the roots in the form of radionuclides from the soil. Deposition, which means that radioactive particles fall upon crops, and also what we call bioaccumulation, which is where radionuclides accumulate in animals that then ingest plants and water, which contains radioactive material. Now, testing background radiation, which is what I'm going to do in a few minutes. I'm also going to test these bananas and look for counts per minute, and then the Brazil nuts, and then finish off with the Atomik product. So I've got a scientific logger which you plug in, and that can log various things over time, such as temperature and light levels and sound and things. But then you can plug in on the bottom, you can plug in another piece of equipment, and this is going to test radioactivity count rate there. It's got a little sensor on the end, and that's given me some results. Right, so Background counts per minute, which having looked it up seems fine, comes out as 19. Brazil nuts, sticking the sensor in the middle of that, comes out at 40 counts per minute, which also seems fine and is slightly higher. Bananas, 34, and I haven't done the atomic yet. I'm building up to that. The Chernobyl Spirit Company is run by scientists from the Ukraine and the UK who have been studying the transfer of radioactivity to crops, both in the Chernobyl exclusion zone and in the Radioactivity district within the zone of obligatory resettlement, where land can't officially be used for agriculture, but people still live. It is from the Radioactivity district that this apple spirit comes to me from. The research shows that in many areas, land could now be used to produce crops, which are safe to eat. And as every chemist apparently is aware of, distillation of fermented crops leaves many of the heavier elements in the waste product, so the distillate alcohol is much more radioactively pure than the original grain. They have used distillation to reduce radioactivity in the crop even further to make a product from Chernobyl which they hope people will want to consume. I've bought it, so perhaps it is working. I assume that a significant part of making the product is as a confidence builder in the use of the land in the future. So a big question remains, and we need to establish, is this radioactive? The death toll is unknown. It's still rising because of the long-term effects of exposure. It's perhaps between 5,000 and 100,000. But the official, according to the HBO series, the official Soviet death toll was and remains at 31. As Gorbachev wrote, perhaps the disaster was the true cause of the collapse of the USSR. If that's true, then this has certainly shaped our world in a very, very significant way. More than 30 years after the world's worst nuclear accident, recovery of the affected areas of Ukraine, Belarus and Russia is ongoing. While some relatively small, highly radioactive hotspots remain in the 30 kilometres Chernobyl exclusion zone, the scientific community has long believed that radiation risks to the affected populations outside the exclusion zone are actually very, very low. But the recovery of these regions has been slow, hampered by restrictions on investment and use of agricultural land, and this misperception, perhaps, of the radiation risks. Now, Chernobyl Spirit Company founders, Gennady Laptev and Jim Smith, have studied Chernobyl for decades. They, like many other scientists, believe that what the affected regions need most is the improvement in terms of well-being in jobs, economic development, healthcare. The Chernobyl Spirit Company is trying on a small scale to help with this, beginning to invest in these affected regions. And the use of their 75% of the profits for this product is going to support the regions and the new Chernobyl Biosphere Reserve within the exclusion zone. Okay, let's build on that point a little bit further. Nobody knows the true effects of the Chernobyl accident, and those effects will be seen further into the future. But in more than 100 years since we first understood that radiation can damage human cells, a huge amount has been learned about radioactive contamination and about radiation risk. The Chernobyl Spirit Company have provided some links for further reading on the website, on their website, and I'll paste them in the description. There's one from the World Health Organization Chernobyl report. There's the Oxford Restatement on Radiation and reports by the UN Scientific Committee on the effects of atomic radiation. The existence of a vast amount of literature hasn't stopped on radiation, hasn't stopped many of the myths about the Chernobyl disaster being perpetuated. And the Chernobyl Spirit Company, like many others, think that these myths do real damage to people's lives in the affected areas. Current radiation dose rates for people living in the exclusion zone are actually quite low generally, and well within the variation of natural radiation dose rates worldwide. The overestimation of radiation risk, both in the affected countries and abroad, has contributed to the huge economic, social and mental health impact of the accident. Though there were very significant health effects of Chernobyl, particularly in the rise of thyroid cancer in those exposed, particularly as children, to short-lived and much-feared iodine-131. The 2006 World Health Organization report concluded that the social and mental health impact was the largest public health problem created by the accident. In the years after the evacuation of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, Belarusian and Ukrainian scientists noticed a big change in the ecosystem of the zone. Animals associated with human populations, like rats and pigeons, declined in numbers massively, whilst wild animal populations increased. Professor Jim Smith co-authored a study of animals in the exclusion zone and found that large mammal densities were comparable to other nature reserves, like in Belarus. The other difference being the wolf population density was much higher in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, perhaps because of less hunting pressure. That doesn't, of course, mean that radiation is good for plants and animals, just that human habitation, forestry, hunting, those things are much worse. There is still some relatively small hotspots in the exclusion zone where there is terrible damage to species, such as the Red Forest, where trees died from the intense radiation in the days after the incident. There are likely to be subtle effects of radiation as well that are ongoing. The wild boar, which is on the bottle here, has become an emblem of the company, of the Chernobyl Spirit Company, in that it represents the resilience of nature, but also the long and difficult road to recovery of the Chernobyl affected people in the face of too many simplistic and often wrong assumptions about their environment. Right, so I hope I've established that this product is a really good social enterprise, but actually, can I drink it, or should people drink it? They've made this small batch of the Spirit, made from the apples grown in this Narodichi region of Ukraine, and by buying one, I get a unique Spirit drink whilst helping support recovery of areas affected by Chernobyl. So the Geiger counter readings are as follows. Background, 19 counts per minute, seems fine. Brazil nuts, 40. The bananas, 34. And to finish off with then, the Atomik, I can reveal, it's fine to drink. It got, based on my non-scientific and amateurish decisions, don't take my word for it, but the numbers produced by the machine and interpreted by me suggest 31.2. Actually, it is safer to consume than Brazil nuts or bananas based on the radiation levels produced.